I'll be talking about the Creative Destruction Lab, which is part of the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, and their relationship with Web3 or blockchain technologies in the defense industry. And I'll also be discussing some of the aspects of photonics and how they apply to various technologies utilized for the biodigital convergence, from what the Canadian military is doing with that. And I'll also be talking about cognitive nudges and pushes towards Society 5.0 from Dr. Norihiro Hagita in Japan and Martin Maier in Canada, specifically in Quebec at the INRS, he works at the Optical Zeitgeist Laboratory. We'll get to that. And I'll also be talking about how the former Canadian military member Jeremy McKenzie is not addressing this push for Society 5.0 and how he's actually fuel for this experiment in and of itself. And I have mentioned Jeremy McKenzie in prior videos, but that is prior to my understanding of the bigger picture known as the Biodigital Convergence. So, to move forward, I want to say that he takes Bitcoin and Ethereum, just like Morgan May Guptill, who is his wife. And that's Jeremy McKenzie right there. So, basically, the blockchain is integral to smart infrastructure because it acts very much like a ledger system in and of itself. And we can see how it would pertain to Martin Maier's work as we progress through the video. But it is essentially the backbone to smart infrastructure. People can read Melanie Swan's Transhuman Crypto Cloud Minds if they so desire, to understand blockchain not just in the economic perspective with crypto and stuff like that, but also with smart contracts and other things of this nature. So here, this is a threat to Pierre Poilievre's wife from Jeremy McKenzie made online. I am not going to read specific words for very obvious reasons. I don't want this video taken down. And this right here is what he said, and he was speaking to his guest and friend Alex Vrend, who is literally in this same Instagram video right over there, which I'll leave links in the description for people and get to that Instagram video in a sec. But anyway, people can see exactly what was said here. And also, I just want to say too, in this article, a spokesperson for the Department of National Defense told CBC in an email that Mackenzie served in the Canadian Armed Forces and that he enrolled in 2003 and was released in 2017. And he was an infantryman with the Royal Canadian Regiment, and that he had one deployment to Afghanistan. So, next we get to why they don't, or why they wear masks, essentially, because very much quite similar to Antifa and large elements of the Palestine movement, they also seem to be hiding their face nonetheless. So of course that's brought up in their FAQ on their website, and they basically talk about protecting identity and denial of information to adversaries, and they also get into talking about how Canada has polarized and politicized and divided kind of things going on, just like pretty much anywhere in the world, and goes on to say that individuals find themselves on outside of accepted social norms regarding their worldview. Now, what I just want to say is that while, of course, certain social norms and stuff are not accepted by the Second Sons, which Jeremy McKenzie is the face of, with pun intended, because him and Alex Brand only appear to be the ones showing their faces there. What happens is, with these social norms, polarities are created, such as during the time with coercive measures or mandates, if you will, referring to these things that are, actual gene therapy. What happens is you have a side that is against these mandates and a side that is for it. However, fact of the matter is neither side were correctly addressing the biodigital convergence. And as far as I'm concerned, even though the synthetic biology gene therapy experiments, which start apparently with the letter V, even though I wouldn't even classify them as such. Nobody was linking those things to the convergence experiment. And when it comes down to things like the truck convoy in and of itself regarding this, funds that were seized and accounts frozen and these kinds of things, there were large elements revolving around crypto and Web3 technologies and within the truck convoy. So what I'm saying is these shutting down of accounts and things like this is really just an excuse to experiment with Web3 technology in and of itself. So as far as I'm concerned, the truck convoy is also a push for Society 5.0, no different than people accepting coercive measures and mandates. So anyway, basically they get on to talk about other organizations and things of this nature, and people can read if they so desire, but just in terms of existing outside of, what they call accepted social norms, fact of the matter is Second Sons is basically already, has its own set of established beliefs anyway, which happen to as well coincide with, other elements with people involved with the truck convoy and those things. But it really doesn't matter what somebody's saying at face value when they're not talking about Society 5.0 and actually more or less pushing this in the form of Web3 technologies, right? It's no different than how in the Palestine movement you have it largely funded by, and by Palestine movement, I'm going to use boycott, divestment, sanctions as an example. BDS was largely funded by the Tides Foundation, okay? And the Tides Foundation has largely income from George Soros, Rockefeller organizations, and the Ford Foundation. Now, one of those Rockefeller organizations is the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which helped bankroll the Foundation for Conscious Evolution. People can see these in other videos or go Google that, look that up themselves. But the Foundation for Conscious Evolution pushed wearable technologies onto people. Just instead of using, we'll say, analytical sciencey language, for lack of better words, there was a lot of metaphysical jargon and occultic, new age type of stuff thrown at people in order for them to accept those things. That's all. So what I'm saying is that the Rockefeller Brothers Fund are no different than Jeremy Mackenzie and the Second Sons, that they are in support of Web3 technologies, which evidently you can donate that to Jeremy, so obviously he's got no problem with that. And it would be very nice to actually hear from Jeremy Mackenzie or Alex Vrend or one of these people in particular do a live stream with me. I have no problem speaking to anyone about these things and what really is going on. However, I will not do this on any of your gig economy, attention economy platforms. So, anyway, to move forward, we have this Instagram video here, and basically Jeremy Mackenzie wants fentanyl to be classified or reclassified as a chemical weapon, to have the Canadian military deal with the distributors. However, fact of the matter is this kind of a thing is actually just asking for martial law in a roundabout way, or not even a roundabout way, I'd say a direct way when you are reclassifying something of this nature. And while Second Sons are very critical about things like immigration as well, which on the polar opposite side with Palestine movement and Antifa and stuff like that would just refer to Second Sons as racist and that sort of a thing. But it's really just about bouncing things back and forth, literally creating, I guess you could say, dualistic dialectic dilemmas. So this YouTube video here is part of the truck convoy emergency inquiry, and this individual interviews Jeremy Mackenzie, and the person interviewing him asks if he's ever reported extremist behavior to authorities. Jeremy says one example would have been fall, I think, of 2021. There was a group online identifying themselves as Links something. It was armed men in the woods with masks. One of them specifically said this is a call to arms. which I understand is an illegal thing to do. It was very clear that they intended to, were promoting the idea of arming people, arming citizens. I think there was an acronym for liberating our neighborhood or something like that, and to engage the forces of the state in violent confrontation. They were commenting on my videos and inferring that they were trying to connect with me and so on. I found this very alarming, and again, putting potentially myself at risk, but other people that follow me and could be exposed to this and spared in whatever was going on there. So once I became aware of the video, I immediately called the mountain police about it. And so he asked if he received a response, and Jeremy responds that he did, and they called him back and asked him what he knew about it. He goes, I said all I know is what I've seen on the internet. I'm simply bringing it to your attention because if I were you, this is something that would concern me. And then there's some dialogue and stuff in between. People can watch all this stuff at basically about the 6.5 hour time mark, roughly 6:40 approximately. And so basically then, to sort of skip ahead, Jeremy was asked if he'd have a continuing relationship with law enforcement to assist in identifying legitimate threats to public safety. And Jeremy says he would give them anything and to assist them in any way. So in this regard, we now have something going on in Toronto, and I just want to say, just to be very clear, it's called Task Force Guardian. I am not inferring that Jeremy McKenzie or the Second Sons are directly related to Task Force Guardian, just so that we are clear there. However, there are definitely some questions and things that I will bring up in relation to this. So this is apparently a new counter-terrorism unit and task force, not a response to a specific threat, so says the police chief. This is the logo for Task Force Guardian. And so basically, the Toronto police say they are creating a counter-terrorism unit and a specialized task force that will see officers with semi-automatic rifles stationed at key locations in the city. Locations include places of worship, tourist attractions, high-traffic public spaces, and critical infrastructure. Police told reporters at a news conference Tuesday. And Police Chief Myron said the dedicated counter-terrorism security unit and Task Force Guardian are not being set up in response to any one threat, but are security measures to quote-unquote prevent, detect, and disrupt extremism and violence. Right. Yeah, extremism, violence, and terrorism. And he also said the measures are a response to an increasingly complex security environment, that visible police presence matters when it comes to deterring violence and reassuring our communities. Torontonians can expect to see Toronto police officers deploy with tactical capabilities, including patrol rifles. So, sorry, I've never heard of a weapon that are called a patrol rifle, so that just sounds like softening of language to me. Maybe someone from the Canadian military can chime in there if they so desire. But anyway, I want to be clear today that this announcement is not about any particular threat, but the growing volume and complexity of threats related to terrorism, extremism, and hate-motivated incidents, right? And then they go on to mention different incidents at synagogues involving gunfire, and they also mention the start of the FIFA World Cup and that sort of a thing. So, and they also say it'll be launched in the coming days, so I'm not really sure when the exact time is to expect seeing armed police in the Toronto streets in, what they call key areas. And I will also link a Facebook video that I saw that shows this actual conference, so that people can see for themselves if there's, of course, anything I missed. So, and of course, anything that would be good to bring up. So, with Task Force Guardian, I also recall TPS, or the Toronto Police Service, saying they're collaborating with the RCMP and the OPP, and that they are continuing Project Resolute. Okay, so for me to explain Project Resolute, they basically talk about proactive engagement in Jewish and Muslim communities amid the Israel-Gaza war, and they spent $19.5 million in 2024 policing these demonstrations. So Anyway, I don't know if they're continuing Project Resolute. I don't know how directly related it is, or if there is any direct relation to Task Force Guardian. But in and of itself, it seems like Task Force Guardian, they're talking about basically threats of extremism and things of this, or what they would call extremism, I guess. So I didn't hear this term in the press conference in particular, but there was a Toronto Police Service article that used this term. I'll also link that article as well. INSET is Integrated National Security Enforcement Teams, which are Canadian counter-terrorist and counter-foreign interference and counter-espionage units operating under the auspices of Public Safety and Public Safety Canada. These federal investigative teams were formed in 2002 in response to the September 11th attacks, right? And Canadian provinces will have national security enforcement sections instead of an inset in places that do not have a large city. And while I want to say that in the press conference I saw in Facebook, they mentioned collaborating, the Toronto Police Service mentioned collaborating with the RCMP and OPP. So in and of itself, like I need to do the research about RCMP and OPP and their relationship to things like Palantir. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't believe that the Toronto Police have a direct relationship with an organization like Palantir. However, the fact of the matter is, if they are working with the RCMP, I don't know if they would have direct access to something like Palantir Gotham or any one of their pieces of software that they have developed. So they mention the Canada Border Services Agency and CSIS, Canadian Security Intelligence Service, which is basically the Canadian version of the CIA, essentially, and the RCMP are basically like the FBI, for people in the States watching this. And they also talk about local and provincial police forces. So the OPP, the Ontario, basically the Ontario Police Department, essentially. So it's interesting to note that Toronto Police Service are pushing for military presence, and Jeremy McKenzie was pushing for that. I mean, that was in relation to fentanyl, but fact of the matter is that they're both pushing some kind of military presence, and as well, another common factor, of course, is that the Palestine movement and Antifa also wear masks very much like the Second Sons do. So I just think that that is definitely interesting, and I've heard people refer to the Second Sons as Antifa 2.0. And I very much do agree with that kind of label, because in and of itself, the talking points of Antifa, the talking points of Second Sons are polar opposite, and it's just meant about throwing ideas back and forth, dualistic dialectic dilemmas. You can add that one to your vocabulary, Jeremy. So, as well, what I want to say about Second Sons too, Mr. Big Operation, sometimes known as the Canadian technique, is a covert investigation procedure used by undercover police to elicit confessions from suspects in cold cases. And police officers create a fictitious gray area or criminal organization and then seduce the suspect into joining it. They build a relationship with the suspect, gain their confidence, and then enlist their help in a succession of criminal acts for which they're paid. Once a suspect has been enmeshed in the criminal gang, they are persuaded to divulge information about the criminal history, usually a prerequisite for being accepted as a member of the organization. So, usually. But anyway, the whole point, though, is even though this is a police technique, what's to say that somebody who's not a police officer can employ this technique? And I will say that while Jeremy McKenzie is no longer with the Canadian military, as he was with the Royal Canadian Regiment, and was deployed, and he was an infantryman in Afghanistan. Even though he is no longer with the Canadian military in the public eye, his agenda and him taking Bitcoin and not informing people about the steps towards Society 5.0 and what that is, and don't worry, I will elaborate on that, of course, and people can watch delegations that I have done in the city of Mississauga to see me talk about those things, as well as James Scott in the city of Ottawa talking about these things, because the battle is ultimately locally as I would say. But anyway, what I'm getting at here is that his activity is fueling this Society 5.0, more or less, and there's no reason why Second Sons couldn't be Mr. Big operation, because when people see certain things and they don't understand the full picture, like some of you seen, a couple live streams of Jeremy's, or seeing a couple public demonstrations or something that Second Sons have done and that sort of a thing, talking about defunding the CDC or whatever, is people can get an impression for something like, oh, we're going to be critical of immigration, and they're also criticizing immigration. Maybe I should join or see what these people are about, and that kind of a thing. And of course, there is apparently some sort of process of getting into that fraternity, so to speak. But regardless, what I'm saying is, it's not hard to get people that agree with you about certain things at face value to get them involved and manipulate them to do potentially criminal things or otherwise. So what I'm saying ultimately too is that as well you'd be roping people into something, bringing out Society 5.0 in and of itself. And I don't think Jeremy McKenzie once again is talking about any of these things in and of itself, and I also don't think he's combating this at the local level either. So with that in mind, we are going to move forward and get into some UFT stuff. So here we have Geoffrey Hinton over here, who's known as the so-called godfather of AI, who is, by the way, at UFT, the University of Toronto, and it says, join RCI Science for a rare and timely fireside chat with Professor Geoffrey Hinton, Nobel laureate, widely known as the godfather of AI. In conversation with acclaimed media personality and technology journalist Amber Mack, together they'll explore the promises, risks, and ethical questions shaping the next era of AI, from scientific discovery to everyday life. One of the most influential figures in modern AI, Professor Hinton helped lay the foundations of today's AI revolution and made waves in 2023 when he walked away from Google to quote-unquote freely speak out about the risks of AI. So I will tell you that he is actually not warning people at all, no matter what his talking points are about so-called warnings about AI, because while he came out in 2023, what happens is in 2024, Policy Horizons introduces this article, Disruptions on the Horizon, where they get into different things where going up and down, you have the impact, and then going left and right, right being most likely, you have a higher impact going up and a higher likelihood to happen going to the right with this chart here. But it mentions artificial intelligence runs wild. So we can see things going to social media as an example, people not being able to differentiate between real videos and AI-made ones and those kinds of things. So what I'm saying is Geoffrey Hinton is not actually warning people about anything. I mean, he works for the University of Toronto, which is ultimately all for this experiment, much like any university, and also Policy Horizons, who is ran by Crystal Vander Elst, who I'll get to in a sec, but Policy Horizons in and of themselves totally advocate for this experiment, the Biodigital Convergence, and their articles are sometimes very simple, sometimes very complex to read through, but they'll throw out a lot of terms for you to look up and technologies, whether we're talking about things involved in smart farming, whether we're talking about the blockchain turning people into biocomputers, CRISPR, whatever the case may be, any aspect of the nanobioinfocogno experiment. So, in and of itself here, Geoffrey Hinton, all he's doing when he talks about AI running wild, even though that may not be the way he particularly phrases the matter, all he's doing is echoing the talking points of organizations like Policy Horizons, who are doing the exact same thing he is. So in and of itself, too, he is not properly, of course, a university professor is not properly warning people about Society 5.0 or the cognitive nudges toward it. And I didn't include this article in this video, but people can look up the future of sense-making through Policy Horizons, which talks about pushing people to accept different narratives and that sort of a thing. So, and also I will say that I have not really heard anybody in the freedom movement talk about Policy Horizons either. So that would of course include Jeremy McKenzie. So here is CDL Defense in the Creative Destruction Lab. Right here we have a picture of Evan Solomon, who is a minister in Toronto. He is the Minister of AI and Innovation, and he also runs something called FedDev, or the Federal Development Agency of Canada. Canada has 7 regional development agencies that just all work on different smart technologies and biodigital projects and that sort of a thing. FedDev refers to Southern Ontario's Federal Development Agency. There's also FedNor and various other development agencies that people can look up in their corresponding provinces. So, February 26, 2026, the Creative Destruction Lab is receiving a Government of Canada investment through FedDev, which I just mentioned, to support its newly launched CDL defense program. The Honorable Evan Solomon, Minister of AI and Digital Innovation, the minister responsible for FedDev, made the announcement at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. This funding will accelerate dual-use technologies that serve both commercial markets and defense applications. CDL Defense is a global program designed to support science-based ventures. These ventures are developing technologies that directly address operational needs in defense, national security, and critical infrastructure across domains including autonomy, space systems, advanced materials, energy, and medtech. I think they meant to say cyberspace systems. We'll get to Moonshot goals and that sort of a thing, and what I actually mean by that later. CDL Defense provides founders with direct access to experienced mentors who've built dual-use companies, operators who understand defense requirements, and procurement expertise to bridge the gap from breakthrough research to scaled deployment. The inaugural program here is currently underway, operating across 6 CDL sites in Canada and Europe. And these are all of them listed, including CDL Toronto, CDL Vancouver, Rockies, even in Estonia and Berlin, which is interesting. And with in-person sessions taking place alongside major security forums, including the Halifax International Security Forum and Munich Security Conference. The CDL Defense Program is also supported by partners Osler and BDC, and will welcome new applicants in fall 2026. Okay, so here now to the Creative Destruction Lab is part of University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, as I said, and it is described as a nonprofit organization that delivers an objectives-based program for massively scalable seed stage science and technology-based companies. Okay, and so here are some examples of different companies and that sort of a thing: Deep Genomics, Notch Therapeutics, etc. And you have various avenues all involved with the convergence, from agri-food, cancer, which likely would have to do with gene editing treatments and CRISPR and that sort of a thing. People can also see UFT's Health Spark for that, which definitely involves Evan Solomon and various others. Health Spark is operated through the Vector Institute of UFT. I've already covered that in a prior video though, but it essentially is precision medicine. You get into a digital society, quantum computing, and of course Web3 technologies. So basically some example of innovation areas in the defense line here. They get into space and ISR, autonomy and robotics, sensors, so that would be like different like kinds of semiconductors and stuff like that, and those kinds of sensors could be, you know, biosensors or, you know, electric warfare enablers. And I've spoke a lot about sensors, as has James in his delegations, in particular biosensors. And you get into medtech, biodefense, and human performance, and that sort of a thing. So now to move forward here, making decisions. So it says making decisions under pressure is difficult, especially when the consequences can be dire. Deployed Canadian Armed Forces personnel can face situations that can implicate their fundamental values and principles. Making the right decision in these cases is critical, and so on and so forth. It gets into moral and ethical dilemmas that can be difficult to address. It can impact the short and long-term mental well-being of personnel. DRDC is Defense Research and Development Canada, in particular, which of course is part of the Department of National Defense, and which would oversee the Canadian military. So DRDC's Toronto Research Centre, in collaboration with researchers from the National Research Council of Canada's Medical Devices Research Centre, have begun to address the challenge for current and future military applications by evaluating the effectiveness of VR, or virtual reality, training. First step in this program of research is developing a method to assess the value and impact of VR training as one way to better prepare military personnel for the moral decision-making challenges that they may encounter during operations. And to do this, decision-making processes are physiological and psychological. Physiological and psychological responses are assessed before, throughout, and shortly after experiencing VR moral scenario. These same factors are compared when reading a paper and pencil presentation of the same scenario. I'll read in a sec, just let me hydrate myself here. An important consideration for the researchers is to optimally train personnel while being mindful of the potential for traumatization from the scenarios themselves. Thus, the research team is also beginning to explore the requirements of creating an intelligent, adaptive VR solution, which could alter aspects of the VR experience in real time, with an ultimate goal of creating an immersive, personalized experience calibrated to the individual user. Alright, and then we shall move forward. Apologies for the brief delay. So, we are going to talk about the National Research Council right here. So, we get into the National Research Council here, and their Photonics Fabrication Center. It says there's a small chip at the center of many fast-growing technologies, including AI data centers, quantum computing, and national defense systems. This chip, a type of photonic device, uses photons instead of electrons, which is particles of light, rather than electricity, to move information at very high speeds with exceptional efficiency. Photonics is not something that I have explored in great depth, but essentially I will be exploring that in further videos, but I do want to say, sorry for stumbling over my thoughts there, but AI data centers, I want to say that there's been a large focus on this, especially on social media. However, fact of the matter is, what a lot of people are doing with these data centers is no different than what they were doing when there was a fictional illness and people were coerced to take gene therapy experiments as a result of this. people zeroed in, the opposition, of course, to those mandates would focus in on the gene therapy experiments without connecting them to the bigger picture, just like people are doing with the AI data centers right now. So I just want to say, at some point in future, I will be exploring data centers a little more in future videos. However, fact of the matter is that they play into large elements of the convergence in and of itself, which seems to be like something that nobody is really talking about. So anyway, the National Research Council of Canada's Canadian Photonics Fabrication Centre, one of only a few facilities of its kind worldwide, make these photonic devices using compound semiconductor materials. It supports companies across the photonics industry bring their designs to market. As global demand for AI rises, the CPFC's compact energy efficient chips are helping to power faster, more economic AI data centers. Whatever you say. So, photons are particles of light, and some can be seen by the human eye while others fall on the invisible spectrum, such as infrared, ultraviolet, and X-ray photons, because photons travel at the speed of light, and photonic devices are essential for building faster and more efficient internet, computing, and communication technologies. Could actually, once again, I'll explore this in future videos, but Li-Fi instead of Wi-Fi is using light instead of electromagnetic waves like a Wi-Fi signal. So that is also something in the works. And also, as well, inside this is not where I wanted to go. Let me move forward to talk about categories of photonic devices here. So you have lasers, which convert electrical current into photons. You have modulators, which manipulate photons to encode data. And amplifiers, which enhance the optical power of signals. And then detectors, which detect photons and convert them into an electrical current. So photonic devices are key components in technologies that need to process information quickly and efficiently and are used in many sectors, including data and telecom, like fiber optic networks, AI data centers, and internet infrastructure. So, and then also sensing and monitoring. It's where you get into self-driving vehicles, robotics, medical imaging, and environmental monitoring. And the aerospace and defense, which has navigation tools, satellites, and national security systems. You get into computing, which has to do with machine learning and quantum computing, as well as electronics like VR headsets and smart devices. So there we go, and photonics is playing an important role as detailed in the Canada Research and Development pages and the programs of interest to the military. So this is Photons Canada, and I believe that they are out in BC. I'll explore them a little more in future videos, but essentially photonics is just saying it plays a large role in the Canadian military, and this program aims to enhance soldier operational effectiveness by increasing protection, situational awareness, weapons effects, mobility, self-sufficiency, and resilience, while limiting physical and cognitive soldier burden with an integrated, human-centric soldier system. They are already using goggles for night viewing and laser protection, photonics devices, LiDAR for depth perception, just to name a few. And you get into land combat systems. Goal of this program is to improve the effectiveness of combat systems, including the field operational vehicle systems and direct to indirect weapon systems required for the Army of Tomorrow. And guidance systems and finders are for the land combat systems where photonics is used. And then you get into surveillance and reconnaissance. This program enhances command over adaptive dispersed technologies with technology integrated in a distributed network environment in adverse environments, and the distributed network environment is using photonics for communication, because that is basically Li-Fi in and of itself instead of Wi-Fi. And then the force program improves the ability of the Canadian forces to conduct adaptive, dispersed operations in terms of space and purpose. It also aims to increase the growth and sustainability of the Canadian Army's forces by offering long-term approaches to training, operations, and combat. As shown in a previous article, the application of AR, or augmented reality or virtual reality for military training, is using photonics, and maritime information warfare enhances the effectiveness of the RCN's command team by improving information management techniques and promoting greater situational awareness through improved intelligence gathering, surveillance analysis, and sensor integration. Photonics is here at play too, as shown in the AI and Photonics article. Optical sensors have proven very useful and are currently used. Photonics is used by the Canadian military in their training, protection, and combat readiness, and is expected to help prepare the Canadian Army for the future. And so then we get to, in particular, unfortunately for Mark Chatteneau over here, his bio, it wasn't working for me to load. So I will talk about him in another video, but I'm just bringing him up because he is tied right into NATO and also works with semiconductors and that sort of a thing, and is part of Defense Research and Development Canada. So if you're someone in the Canadian military or has ties to the Canadian military, that should likely be looked into, and once again will be mentioned in a future video. So CDL Web3. So now we're back to the Creative Destruction Lab. In and of itself is an 11-month startup program offered at HEC Montreal beginning in late July and concluding in mid-June. CDL Web3 stream supports founders that are building the next iteration of the internet through decentralized and metaverse technologies. So essentially they're trying to move after Web 2 to Web 3. Right, which is blockchain-based technologies. There's even Web 4 and Web 5, but that's for other videos. And so the Web3 stream brings together experienced entrepreneurs, technologists, and active investors to help scale ventures developing blockchain and metaverse technologies. CDL Web3 is tailored for visionary entrepreneurs developing applications that have the potential to transform financial institutions, disrupt the gaming industry, or bring bold innovation in governance. All right. So, and I believe as well that there is something about AI governance in Ireland. I'm not saying that the government has gone totally AI or anything, but it's interesting to note. So forget Ireland for a second. People can totally fact check me on that one. But it's interesting that Albania literally has a minister of AI that literally is AI, and then also, I believe last year in 2025 is when the Minister of AI and Innovation became a thing, and that's where Evan Solomon happened to be appointed. So, some aspects of Web3 technology that they're working through or working on, you have different organizations that are decentralized as well as different apps. So apps on a phone, decentralized applications are hooked up to their own blockchains as well. And then you get into NFTs, which are like pictures that hold data essentially. And so, yeah, it's a pretty diverse field here, but I want to say in particular, besides, some of the companies here that are mentioned, literally we have Paul Desmarais, the third here, working with UFT. Now, I don't know too much about the Desmarais family, but I know that they are largely known in Quebec, and that essentially Paul Desmarais II, I don't know if he still presently owns Power Corporation, but essentially the Desmarais family are known for acquiring or taking over Gatineau Electric and the Power Corporation, and have very close ties to different political figures, And I know that different political figures have actually worked for the Power Corporation as well. So, and being that they are largely involved in investment and finance and that sort of a thing, it's no wonder that they are in the Web3 sphere. Being that there is a push for something called tokenization, which I will get to, and I have mentioned I have mentioned tokenization in prior videos. However, in a nutshell, essentially, I'll just explain now very briefly, and then I'll get to it in more depth, but purpose-driven tokens, as Martin Maier would say, who we'll get to, is essentially tokens that are allotted to one's digital twin, which would be hooked up to the blockchain. So there's your ledger system to keep track of tokens. And this is to basically, honestly, replace the existing monetary system that we have. And there is a shift from economics to tokenomics, as said in one of Martin Maier's articles, which I have brought these things up to the Mississauga City Council, knowing that I definitely don't consent to this experiment, and nobody else consents to this experiment if they don't even know what's happening. How can you say you consent, right? So, in a nutshell, Paul Desmarais, the third here, has many ties to different investment firms, the United Nations, and that sort of a thing. And he also worked for Goldman Sachs at the investment banking division. So here we go. And then now I'm going to move into Gabriel René, who happens to be the co-founder of the cognitive computing company Versus. Versus AI is out in BC. If people, want a picture of him, if that doesn't pop up, then they can literally see my latest delegation for this, and I'll be leaving links in the description, of course. So he's the co-author of the 2019 book, The Spatial Web, How Web3 Connects Humans, Machines, and AI to Transform the World. He's an executive director of the Spatial Web Foundation, and he also chaired the IEEE Standards Association working group that developed IEEE P2874 Spatial Web Standard, and is co-author of the 2023 report, Future of Global AI Governance. And he's designed and helped develop software with clients including the United Nations, European Commission, Verizon, Sony, Microsoft, Intel, Apple, etc. So the spatial web in and of itself is basically something that integrates physical and digital spaces into one. And what makes the World Wide Web different is it links websites together, but the spatial web links people, places, and assets together. So that's why you have a connected cube there instead of a connected square. And so in and of itself too, I just want to say that with the spatial web in and of itself, it contains various technologies involved in it, like the blockchain. It says 5G networks, but there's actually a move toward 6G, which I'll be once again referring to Martin Maier's work for. And, synthetic biology, 3D printing, all of these kinds of things, cloud computing, drones, robotics, smart cars, wearables, etc. So, and yeah, this is just a little visual here just to show you some of the things like the Internet of Things, quantum computing, digital twins, and other aspects. So what I wanted to mention, the IEEE is one of the international standards organizations. The ones I tend to come across most are the ISO, the IEC, the IEEE, and the ITU, although there are various international standards organizations. These are also things that a lot of so-called freedom fighters of sorts don't talk about. And the international standards organizations write standards that engineers all follow when doing their job, revolving around the Biodigital Convergence. That's what all standards are built around. And also every country has their own standards organization. So as I was speaking about dialectics before, giving the example of the Second Sons and Antifa or the Palestine movement or whatever in their clash. It's no different than an Israel and Palestine clash, because in the ISO Technical Committee on Cybersecurity, which I've covered in an Israel-Palestine video that I have made, what happens is the ISO, a technical committee, is something that has multiple countries' standards organizations working together. And in the Cybersecurity Technical Committee, you literally have Russia and Ukraine, you have Israel, Iran, and Palestine, and basically combinations of nations that supposedly are at odds with each other or are enemies on the world stage. So all war is theater ultimately, because all countries want this Society 5.0 and are pushing for it in different ways, and some places are more advanced than others with different technologies and that sort of a thing. So before I mentioned the term moonshot goal when I was referring to the Creative Destruction Labs space program, because from my understanding, anything having to do with space is always ultimately a cyberspace program. And the term moonshot, in and of itself, actually, even though it says here that the term moonshot can be traced to the U.S. JFK administration and the expansion of the U.S. space program in the 60s, pursuing, space flight and lunar exploration, so they're saying. The reality of the situation, when you look at Dr. Norihiro Hagita, is that Moonshot Goal 1, which is overcoming a realization of a society in which human beings can be free from limitations of body, brain, space, and time by 2050. The Moonshot Goal is literally just a term to refer to a mandate to complete Society 5.0. And while the year 2050 is mentioned here, I will say that in a Japanese document written by Dr. Norihiro Hagita, which was actually found on the Canadian government website, they talk about normalizing this by 2030, and I brought that to the Mississauga Environmental Committee. So anyway, this article here in and of itself also gets into various countries being involved, such as Canada, the U.S., and like Canada, the U.S., Australia, Japan, and other organizations like DARPA, BARDA, Canada's NSERC or CFAR, and Japan's Moonshot Research and Development Program, and the National Research Council, etc., and various technologies and subject matters are discussed, from cancer, biotechnology, personalized or precision medicine, pharma development, neuroscience, quantum computing, carbon capture, AI, and more. So, now to move on to Dr. Norihiro Hagita in a minute, the chair and professor of the Arts Science Department at the Osaka University of Arts. So, in a nutshell, they talk about building cybernetic avatar infrastructure in the cloud while easing the acceptance of cybernetic avatars into future society. And they develop technologies relating to cyborgs and avatars known as cybernetic avatars, and they say it allows expansion of human physical, cognitive, and perceptual abilities. So essentially what Society 5.0 in and of itself loosely looks like is they want people to basically teleoperate robots or cybernetic avatars to do one's day-to-day life things like going to work or getting groceries or whatever it is. And also they highlight this as a way to travel and see places and market tourism, among other different kinds of cognitive nudges toward this experiment. And we could see actually right over here just above my face, these are some of the different people involved at the Osaka, at the Osaka University of Arts. So these kinds of people should be questioned directly or should be brought up in any delegation out there, especially if people in Japan have the option to delegate. I would, of course, help them with that. Just because the term Society 5.0 in and of itself was coined by Shinzo Abe's, it was either Shinzo Abe or someone in his administration, former Prime Minister of Japan. People should be bringing this up publicly, and I'm more than willing to help anybody do this anywhere in the world, as the battle is local and people should be delegating locally, or if they can't as well, another option would be to make pamphlets that would be relevant to their country which they live in, because like I said, all countries are involved in this and all countries have standards organizations. So, and things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are really just mandates for the convergence in and of itself, and in a nutshell are just basically vague and roundabout ways of supporting these standards that are written by these standards organizations. So now to move forward here, we're going to look at Dr. Martin Maier, who talks about the 6G tactile internet, XR extended reality, and he's the scientific head at the Optical Zeitgeist Laboratory. There's his phone number if you want to give him a call. He doesn't pick up, by the way, and doesn't answer his voicemail, but I'd still give him a call nonetheless. And I will say that people like Crystal Vanderelst, who run Policy Horizons, and people like Martin Maier are actually some of the people that really don't want these things addressed publicly. And when you do address these things publicly, especially when delegating, you are essentially forcing, if this is like a game of poker, you are forcing somebody to essentially fold and get a new hand at the very least. I can't, and I also don't believe it's our place to make deceptive people not be deceptive. If we want to change human nature, if you want to change human nature in and of itself, go be an engineer like Martin Maier then, right? Ultimately, these people want to even change what it means to be human. And people like Crystal Vanderelst, the person who runs Policy Horizons, is a member of the IEC, one of the international standards organizations. And these people in and of themselves don't want these things addressed in a public venue. When we put things on social media, which I am hypocritically doing, we are only really attracting like-minded algorithms. And yes, while information is spread in and of itself, we basically need like-minded algorithms in that way of speaking, rather than actually develop genuine connections with people in our community through handing out flyers or pamphlets, right? So, once again, I'm willing to help people actually take action in person too. So, Dr. Martin Maier's research activities aim at providing insights into technologies, protocols, and algorithms shaping the future of unified communication networks for broadband access, as well as exploring new ways of deploying emerging technologies in related multidisciplinary research areas. His work aims at rethinking the role of unified communications networks in order to unleash their full potential, including a future convergence with other technologies and economic sectors. Together with his students, he currently focuses on human-to-robot communications to help merge and recombine mobile internet, automation of knowledge work, Internet of Things, cloud technology, and advanced robotics, which represent 5 technologies with the highest estimated potential economic impact for 2025. So, Martin Maier is a full professor at INRS in Montreal, Canada, and he was educated at the Technical University in Berlin, Germany. And in particular, he was visiting postdoc fellow at Massachusetts at MIT, and he was visiting professor at Stanford University, and he was a co-recipient of the 2009 IEEE Communication Society Best Tutorial Paper Award, fellow at the European Commission, and so on and so forth. Achievement Award of the IEEE Communication Society. and Outstanding Paper Award of the IEEE Computer Society Bio-Inspired Computing, and he's known for his contribution to the symbiosis between internet and human being, which I'll be talking about a little bit in this video. And he's written different books in the subject, like Towards 6G, A New Era of the Convergence, and the sequel, 6G and Onward to Next G, Road to the Multiverse, so on and so forth. So, now to dive into the final portions of the video, we have Dr. Martin Maier, 2025, the actual 6G standardization. We'll start with release, take a closer look at the leveraged terahertz communications frequencies. Integrated sensing and communication will be key for realizing perceptive mobile networks, and quantum technology and quantum computing will play a key role, and also there will be a transition from softwareization to blockchainization. These are Martin Maier's words in a YouTube video of his, which I'll be linking here. 6G will be the first generation of networks, which will be inherently AI native. He says there's a difference between 5G and 6G. 5G is more AI for networks. 6G will be network for AI. So you can use the network to generate AI. So this gives rise to so-called intelligence and endogenous networks, IEN. And it's brain-inspired self-evolution capabilities. So you build networks that are capable of self-evolving toward AI, all brain-inspired. And then he gets into paradigm shifts that are highlighted, from energy efficiency to sustainable transformation, from physical and digital worlds to cyber-physical continuum, from data links to services beyond communication. At the core of this network is the metaverse right here, which we see in the center of that circle over there. And once again, people can get a clear image of this by actually watching the YouTube video that I've taken screenshots from. And then these are some examples of next G objectives, which of course includes the metaverse and quantum networks. And then here we get into the next G Alliance roadmap. Involves all the major players in the USA and Canada. This is about multi-sensory 6G digital world experiences that transform human interactions across physical, digital, and biological worlds. It's all about the symbiotic relationship between technological and human evolution, he says. And then you get into the fusion of real and digital worlds here. So, an architecture of extended reality experiences lead to creation of cross-reality environments, and this is what the multiverse is in and of itself. He says extended reality includes VR and AR, but goes beyond that. Time, matter, and space are physical dimensions, but have a digital counterpart. Time is replaced with no time. It's autonomous, and then real space is replaced with virtual spaces, and matter can be extended to no matter or bits. This gives rise to cross-reality environments. So, in and of itself, Dr. Martin Maier's work goes hand in hand with Dr. Norihiro Hagita in and of itself. And then we get to the Internet of No Things over here, which deal with bearables, which would include smartphones, and then we get to wearables, which contain virtual or augmented reality goggles or haptic gloves for avatar and robots. So kind of like mirroring the touch sense in and of itself. That's what haptics is. And then mirables, which is AI enhanced MEC or social robots in and of itself. And then you get into the extrasensory perception network. Human is in the center and can communicate with a robot, which would deal with space, time, and matter, or there's a human avatar online communication. An avatar can be described by the dimensions of the multiverse: no time, no space, no matter. So Then here he talks about fungal networks and mentions they interconnect trees, and neuroscientists were thinking about trees and ecologists were thinking about brains. So he goes on to mention that the mycelium network is ubiquitous, so all forests are interconnected. And he mentions 6G is not copying human intelligence, but more nature's intelligence. So we envision that there should be a transition from AI to what we call artificial naturalness, evolution, and life. Right. So this all has to do with his, rise of the interbeing, I guess, where it's a merging of the internet and the human being or living being, I guess. So in and of itself, that's where you get into mycorrhizal fungal networks, where nanotechnology through biomimicry is mirroring how mushrooms communicate with each other. Nanotechnology is biomimicking nature in and of itself. So essentially, Martin Maier is fully advocating for terraforming nature in and of itself, and it's funny how different people and government and that sort of a thing talk about climate change when in reality they are the ones changing and terraforming the climate, or rather giving the check mark for it and enabling those things, because ultimately it boils down to the international standards organizations. So now I'm going to say a little bit and conclude, but I will end by noting that this push for Society 5.0 is a worldwide experiment, and that all countries are involved at every level through their international standards organizations who collaborate with international standards organizations like ISO, IEC, IEEE, ITU, and even so-called resistance groups or freedom fighters are part of distracting you through criticisms of immigration or public health measures or some form of corruption, so that you're not actually seeing the bigger picture playing out. And I will say that in my experience in life, going all the way up to about 2022, I was distracted by secret societies and fraternities and really didn't see the experiment taking place until I spoke with James Scott. And he basically was the person to inspire me to delegate in and of itself and take action locally. And I think everyone should be doing the same, as well as making flyers on the subject that would be relevant to the country they live in or the specific area they're in, however they do that, and looking at the international standards organizations, which should probably be on those pamphlets. So James and I are willing to help people delegate in their local areas, as well as even help them with creating a flyer. So in and of itself, I appreciate people watching the video and taking the time to do this, but ultimately what's more important is taking action in your communities and researching the subject for yourself and learning about the international standards organizations and their work right down at the local level. So it'll be much harder for people like Dr. Norihiro Hagita, Dr. Martin Maier, and Crystal Vander Elst, Suzanne Brandt, and people like this to actually implement this push for Society 5.0 and have people actually accept it. It will be much harder when people are bringing this to their local communities, because ultimately there's always some kind of nudge of sorts that sometimes people are not seeing when it's happening in order to make people accept this kind of a thing. And of course, as we know the phrase, different strokes for different folks, what I'm saying is that there's always a different kind of program that's written for a different kind of person. So in and of itself, again, to someone like Jeremy McKenzie, people that are critical of immigration and those things might likely teeter in that direction, right? So anyway, I think I've said more than enough. So everyone can check me out on Facebook at Matt Unseated, and or here on YouTube at Matt D Unseated, or check out James Scott, and his bookstore is known as the Barely Bruised Book Club in Ottawa. So thanks everyone, and take care.